Near the village of Hartington, the infant River Dove flows into the first of a series of spectacular limestone dales. This is Beresford Dale, a scene of perfect tranquillity that was to enchant two men who would create one of England's finest sports.
Oh sir, doubt not but that angling is an art, and an art worth your learning. Those words have been reprinted more times than any other book in the history of the English language, barring of course the Bible and the Book of Common Religious Prayer. They were written by a gentleman born in 1593 to an industrial family from Stafford, but who would go on to write some of the great biographies of his age, to become favoured in the court of the king, and to inspire a new sport. Over 350 years ago, the complete angler, or the contemplative man's recreation, was first written down by Izaak Walton.
Izaak Walton, a native of Stafford, was born in 1593 and made his fortune through industry and other escapades before he became obsessed with the pursuit of fishing.
There was one river that Izaak Walton loved more than any other, the River Dove. It bubbles to the ground through peaty earth some 12 miles distant on the high moors above Buxton. By the time it's passed through the small village of Hartington, it truly takes on a character of its own when it enters the first of the great limestone gorges. This is Beresford Dale, and behind me is Pike Pool, the pool of which Walton wrote Every Fisherman Dreams. Its name is not from the fish, but from the giant sack of limestone that rises sheer out of the water. It's not hard to see why Walton fell so in love with fishing when you could be in a landscape like this. At the time, Beresford was owned by Charles Cotton. Walton was some 40 years his senior, but he managed to befriend him, and indeed they built a friendship that lasted a lifetime. They spent hours, days, months, and probably over a year in their entire lifetime walking up and down the length of the river, trying to fish every new spot they could find and developing new techniques. In the evenings, they'd retreat to the hall or the beautiful little fishing cottage that was built higher up the valley. There, they would discuss not only the day's fishing, but also religion and other topical issues. There are many people who think that whilst they were sat there smoking their pipes and chatting, they were discussing different things that they could put into the book that would reflect what was going on in the country at the time. Of course, all of this is conjecture, and people today in this great literary work find their own meanings. But what is it that has meant that The Complete Angler has lasted over 350 years and been one of the best-selling books of all time? For me, it's his love of the landscape and wildlife. Every page seems to be soaked with references to not only the beauty of the place, but the birds and other animals which can be found. Even around here, just look at the mosses and the lichens and ferns clinging onto every rock, and the plethora of wildflowers emerging from the banks of the river itself. When we read this book today, we read about how life was some 4 centuries ago. Many of us miss this life, many of us miss these landscapes, for now the vast majority have disappeared. But along the River Dove, in Beresford Dale and further down into Wolfscott and Dovedale, we can find some of these pristine areas of wildlife still preserved for our enjoyment today. And who could not walk down these dales and imagine that Walton and Cotton were with them?
My honest scholar, it is now past 5 o'clock. We will fish till 9 and then go to breakfast. Go you to yonder sycamore tree and hide your bottle of drink under the hollow root of it. For about that time and in that place we shall, I warrant you, make good, honest, wholesome, hungry breakfast, and I will give you direction for the making and using of your flies. And in the meantime, there is your rod and line, and my advice is that you fish as you see me do, and let's try which can catch the first fish. Look you, scholar, you see I have hold of a good fish. I now see it as a trout. I pray, put that net under him, and touch not my line, for if you do, then we break all. Well done, scholar, I thank you. Now for another. Trust me, I have another bite. Come lay down your rod and help me to land this as you did the other. So now we shall be sure to have a good dish of fish for supper. The trout is a fish highly valued both in this and foreign nations. He may be justly said, as the old poet said of wine and we English say of venison, to be a generous fish. A fish that is so like the buck that it also has his seasons. For it is observed that he comes in and goes out of season with the stag and the buck. His name is of a germane offspring, and he is a fish that feeds clean and purely in the swiftest streams, and on the hardest gravel he may justly contend with all freshwater fish. For presidency and daintiness of taste, and that being in the right season, the most dainty palates have allowed presidency to him.
Today fishermen come to Dovedale to carry on Walton's tradition, casting in the glistening evening waters for that elusive trout, even if they don't get a bite. Could you wish a better place? In a secluded spot near to Pike Pool, Cotton's small fishing house still stands, bearing the inscription, "Sacred to Fishermen," above its door. If you use your imagination, you can still smell the embers of the late fire and make out the sounds of the two friends discussing their day's catches within. A beautiful little chocolate brown bird, which would have been a welcome companion to Walton and Cotton beside the dove, is the dipper, so called because of its habit of bobbing up and down when perched on exposed rocks alongside the river. Highly energetic, patrolling a great length of water, the most busy have been known to make 60 dips a minute. They are also quite exceptional for their ability to feed underwater, staying submerged by using their wings against the current to push down whilst gripping the stones with their feet. Their dense and well weatherproof feathers help them to stay warm in the water and dry quickly upon emerging.
This dipper is cleaning his plumage to make sure his feathers remain in perfect condition.
Another characteristic bird of the limestone dales is the grey wagtail. Much more striking than its name, its slate grey upper parts contrast beautifully with its lemon yellow underside. They breed between April and July and build their nests in the crevices and tree roots in the valley side, lining it with delicate mosses from the sheltered banks. Although their range has expanded in the last century, they are not a common species. Usually found in great densities in the high hills, they eat the insects which glide beside the fast-flowing streams and rivers.
This grey wagtail is using a moss-covered rock in the centre of the river as a perch for catching small insects. He quickly flitters back and forth once he spots a tasty morsel. Further downriver from Beresford we reach the quaint hamlet of Millvale.
From here we gain entry to Dovedale, without doubt the most visited and famous dale in the Peak District. It has inspired not only fishermen, but all who have visited have had their heartstrings pulled. Lord Byron wrote of the Dale, "I can assure you there are things in Derbyshire as noble as Greece or Switzerland." Dovedale has such scenery as can be found nowhere else in England. The approach is best made in the evening, when the tourists have left and as the sun begins to sink behind the hills. Most approach from the south, but I truly believe our entry from the north is by far the finest. Passing through flower-rich meadows, the magnificent portal of broken lofty rocks is reached. Rugged in their grandeur, fractured masses of stone intermingle with the ashy woodland. The first sight met is two large natural excavations known as the Dove Holes, which pierce the rock. The largest, 60 foot wide but of no great depth. These caves were cut by glacial rivers which scoured away the rock of the gorge to create all we shall see. Passing through the luxuriant foliage, whole rocks seem to rise in perpendicular masses on both sides. On the next meander, Pickering Tor rises to an unseen height, the hillside broken into spiny pinnacles which stand up like fragments of some wide ruin. Whilst on your right, Island Rock, an enormous mass of isolated stone, rises sheer out of the water. The gorge narrows, and emotions of awe and terror in equal measure are inspired by the imposing precipices. Black, bare and frowning by some mighty convulsion of nature, the sides seem to have been rent asunder, while storms of long-forgotten ages have torn and riven the surface. Occasionally large stones are thrown across the cataract, creating a series of fairy cascades which sparkle with a peculiar brilliancy. At the sides, gloomy caverns enchant explorers into the heart of the mountain beyond. Frequently grotesque and fanciful faces press from the rocks. Here a lion seems to have been frozen mid-cry. And further down the dale, appearing like a triumphal arch, Reynard's Cave rises from the ancient screes. William Wordsworth, one of our greatest landscape poets, visited without leaving a verse, though this land stayed with him, for many years later he wrote the following lines about a distant love. "The stars of midnight shall be clear to her, and she shall lean her ear in many a secret place, where rivulets dance their wayward round. She dwelt among the untrodden ways, beside the springs of Dove."